as well as obviously developing really skilled, competent mentors who can walk with men each week for an hour and support them in that social sort of setting. And so we've got people that go out for a surf together or go for a walk together or kick a footy together. So that's probably a bit of a summary, Glenn. Thank you.
That's a great start, John. And just want to acknowledge the very the very personal reasons why you got into the suicide prevention space, and the way that your work is honouring your godson. Is that right?
Godson and nephew, yeah.
Yeah.
He's living with us at the time. So really the effect it had on my one young child and an older child many years ago, 6 or so years ago, was quite profound. So just looking through the gaps. I spent 20 years doing crisis counselling, so I wanted to be a bit more preventative focused, if you like.
Yeah. And what are the six areas where you're operating?
Glenn, the 6 areas, so our oldest program is on the Gold Coast. That's been going for close to 3 years. We operate in Bundaberg. We operate on the Sunshine Coast. We operate in the Lockyer Valley. We operate in Darling Downs, and now we operate since the start of this year in Gladstone.
Yeah. And to my great shame, living halfway between Gladstone and Bundaberg, I still haven't come out and seen you guys, and I must make amends on that this year. So thanks. Great start, John. It gives us a sense of the Marcus Mission's specific approach to sort of building peer support at a community level through those different training programs and that social interaction, the particular focus on suicide prevention in younger men. So next we've got Ross Ariola, who's a board member of Parents Beyond Breakup, and declaration of interest. I too am a board member of Parents Beyond Breakup. Over to you, Ross.
Thank you. Yeah, that's correct. I am a director or a board member of Parents Beyond Breakup. I'm also a facilitator and a dad with lived experience. And just to sort of frame who Parents Beyond Breakup is and the support organisations that operate under that, known as Dads in Distress and Mums in Distress as well. Parents Beyond Breakup's been around since 1999. And it predominantly started out of Coffs Harbour on a balcony with our founder, Tony Miller, who met other dads, actually put an ad out in the local newspaper, just reaching out to other dads who were doing it tough, especially around family separation and everything that goes in with that. And, we've heard numerous stories, or we've been touched to some extent around the impact of family separation. So he put a local ad because he could not find any support or any area that would actually focus on supporting blokes blokes supporting blokes. So he put a local ad, and that's actually how DIDS, or Dads in Distress, it was known at the time back then, started. And it was actually the first meeting, or the first support meeting or group, was started on Father's Day. And ever since then, it's grown to be a national organisation. The support that it primarily provides is helpline support and peer support groups. We do that nationally, and we operate a national telephone hotline. The key services that we provide, other than the helpline services, which most people will be accustomed to, is our peer support group model. And that model has been, like I've mentioned, since our foundation, been quite effective in dealing with suicidality. For us, it's quite a unique model because as a dad who, for example, myself, who came across the organisation wanting to get some form of support, to meet with other like-minded dads who had been there, basically to get a sense, and without realising it, to sort of find a sense of empathy. And that's something quite unique about the organisation. The model or the process that it follows around support provides a ton of empathy, and it's very hard to encapsulate that. But when you start looking at the model, which is, I think, very similar to the AA model around, peer support, there's no steps that you need to provide. But what we find is a 2-part model where there's psychotherapeutic and psychoeducational. And when you combine those with everybody who's got lived-in experience, the empathy is just, seeping out the doors. It's basically, it's quite infectious. And what happens is you end up getting dads who are going through a very rough time and not knowing what to do legally, not knowing what to do at all, really, because no one's been prepared for the situation. And a dad like myself, when I came across the organisation in 2015, I found exactly the same thing. Open model, lovely support framework, and basically I started being empowered with the ability to understand my situation better. They weren't there to help fix my problem, because that was something I had to own, and that's a very clear thing about Parents Beyond Breakup. We never own anybody's problem, but we empower individuals to own that problem. So from there it grew, and that model, which I'd love to talk about further, really is something unique to Parents Beyond Breakup, and it's been supporting and doing a lot of suicide prevention ever since. So hopefully that's I think that's more than 5 minutes, Glenn, but that's summarised Parents Beyond Breakup.
It's a great start, Ross, and thanks, for sharing just a little bit of your experience there. There's this theme of lived experience, both from Jon being motivated and his family being motivated to start Marcus Mission because of their own experience with the godson and nephew, and the huge role of dads with lived experience supporting each other, which is at the heart of the Dads in Distress Parents Beyond Breakup model. So yeah, give us a really good start on that. So lots of great stuff being posted in the chat box as well. A couple of people referencing other peer support groups. So please carry on adding to the conversation there. We'll come next to Steve Jackson at Mates in Construction, another very well-established organisation that's long been a key player in the suicide prevention space, doing something very unique and very different from other suicide prevention organisations. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. So Mates in Construction, we are a non-for-profit charity established in 2007, 2008, from within the construction industry in Queensland. What we do is to encourage men and friends and mates to not only notice when something is going wrong or something's different with someone's behavior, but to actually confront it and say stuff like, something's happening for you, you're behaving slightly differently, or something's going on, what's going on, and start a conversation. The reason why we do that is we actually go out to train within the workforce. So go out onto construction sites, and actually there's 3 parts to our program. It's a 45-minute presentation on site that addresses awareness of what it looks like when someone is struggling, and I guess attempts to try and change that belief that people want to help others, but they think that they don't know how to, and we try to make that really, really simple. And I guess the proof in the pudding is since 2007, 2008, since we started, over 200,000 workers have gone through that 45-minute awareness training session. And that works within the workplace, but it also works outside in normal everyday life. A little bit of knowledge can go a long way. And so it works with your family, with your friends, in work, out of work. And obviously, if we do that, we then had to back it up and say, okay, so if someone has been identified on site by their co-worker, what do you do about it? And the second part of our program is a 4-hour training session that's internationally recognized through Living Works. And we give the second stage, these people 4 hours of training to give them some tools for their toolkit, or some strategies about if someone has been identified as thinking of taking their life, or even if it's not, if it's just financial stuff or relationship stuff, that they're a person that person can go to. They're easily identifiable on site. They're recognized. We give them stickers, colored stickers on their hard hats, that they can be pinpointed and identified on site. And the third part is those people who are connectors, as we call them. They do a 2-day training session in assist applied suicide intervention skills training. which actually targets people who have put a plan together and what you can do about it to keep them safe, to get them the help that they need. We, in the beginning, felt that help seeking was going to be the way to go, but we've now discovered that probably help offering is a much more beneficial way of getting blokes on site to get help. And that's what we attempt to do when we do the program. I think that's about 3 or 4 minutes. So
that's perfect. And
yep.
Yeah, perfect. And you've finished on a kind of fundamental point there, which is one of the powerful things about peer support involving men, is that the focus is on the help giving rather than the help receiving. But yet, by being a help giver, and being surrounded by other blokes who are help givers, you actually make it easier for yourself to get help when you need it. A friend of mine who was involved in setting up some of the first men's sheds in Victoria, he said, with the first, because sheds are incredible peer support networks like this as well. Whenever you go to a shed and talk about suicide, you'll always get one of the old fellas will come up and say, don't tell them this, but these old bastards are keeping me alive. It's that kind of, that through social connection kind of suicide prevention piece. It doesn't necessarily even involve a conversation about suicide. But my mate who set up one of the first men's sheds in Victoria used to tell this story that in the first men's shed he set up, there were 20 men. And when asked why they were there, 19 of the 20 men said, we're here to help the other blokes. So there was one bloke who was like getting all this help, and all the other guys were there just to give help in their world, but actually, obviously, at the same time, they were receiving help, which is the power of peer support for men. Great. Okay. And last but not least, we're going to come to Peter Seligman, who's going to give us an insight into the work of the Banksia Project, which runs peer support groups with a particular focus on men's mental health. Peter, what have you got to share?
Everybody, thanks for welcoming me. Like a lot of the other stories we've heard today, already, we were formed out of the lived experience. Original founders had some mental health issues and concerns, went out to seek some support about setting up the peer support frameworks. Going for 4 or 5 years now. It's not a difference. Seed funding meant that we designed a psychosocial education program designed around peer support, covering off all the usual modules of self-regulation, fundamental underpinnings of CBT, self-regulation, education, self-care, and so on and so forth. The things that are the building blocks in wellbeing and resilience. As a psychologist, I've been around for the last 30 or 40 years focusing on adult resilience and designing programs that fits into that sort of fairly sound model. We have garden rooms, which are public events, where we're about to do a garden room in Orange on, you don't need to be bulletproof, and we'll have 6 or 8 speakers in the course of that program. Then we have garden rooms, growth rooms, which are the community events that occur regularly. 6, 8, 10 or 15 men. We recruit and train facilitators. They go 3-day training. They get training on both the content and the delivery and safety of the group and mental health first aid and so on. So the groups come in there. We're running half a dozen virtual groups now, which is a response to COVID, and same sort of numbers. So that's a really useful mix of play space. We know that our groups if they have a theme, so whether it be football, a sporting interest, a locational base, an industry base, and so on, the model translates into that capacity to support men within that community of interest. So we've got some industry-specific ones, a growth room in the creative industries, the advertising, creative arts. We've got rooms working in hospitality. We've got rooms working in place, country, and so on. So 10 to 15, 20 guys. Like most of you, the guys who come in all report significant benefit in terms of both the peer support, the commonality that they're not alone, in terms of taking a risk management approach to suicide prevention. The general theme in terms of suicide prevention is isolation, and anybody who engages in a room like ours or some of the others that we've heard about today are less likely to commit suicide, because the risk profile changes significantly the minute they join or if they either seek help or obtain help and support. So that's the Banksia Project.
Right. Thanks, Peter. Have you got some background noise, Peter?
Yeah, it's not work environment. It's a bit difficult, so but I can't do much about it at the moment.
Gotcha. Just at least I know where it's coming from. Thanks. Great. So, so there we go. Four groups, all with peer support for suicide prevention at their hearts, but all taking different approaches. I'm trying to I might come back to you in a second, Peter. I'm just trying to pull out sort of the key differences. So, you've got MATES. It's really clear that MATES is a settings-based approach, going where men are, going to industries which are what we call male-dominated. So, yes, construction, but I also understand that MATES has moved out into sort of mining and engineering and other areas like that. Even looking recently at some projects around suicide at community level using sports clubs, which are often also male-dominated. Dads in Distress goes where men are in a different way, and then it meets them at their point of distress. So separation, family breakdown, not having trouble with access to your kids. These are well-known stressors for suicide, and we know it's a point when men really do. It's often said that men don't reach out for help as much as we as women do. But in terms of life crises where men reach out for help, then separation and the issues with their kids is a point where they really do reach out looking for help. And so what DIDS is doing there is it's not set up as a suicide prevention group or a mental health group, but it's just specifically about dads in distress, and it identifies that point and meets dads in their distress and takes it from there. John, Marcus Mission. So obviously you've got sort of a population focus of younger men. I'm trying to work out what is, as you sort of roll out your model, and you're in 6 different places now. What are you learning about what the entry point is for you? Is it about a geography, like getting into Bundaberg or Gladstone? Is it about an age group? Do you specifically focus young men? What's the contact point for you in terms of first building a community?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I mean, firstly, we changed very quickly. We're 18 to 44 initially, but we are 18 plus. So we have men of all ages in our program. We certainly, one of the things that was pretty important for us was to address regional areas and to be able to deal with some of those. When we first started, we worked on the idea that if we build it, so if we, put it out there and we say, hey, vulnerable men, come along, they will. And that was completely false. So we then changed that very quickly, because what we then did is to say, hey, if you're a mate that wants to help another mate or wants to mentor and is interested in skill development, this is the pathway we have, a really rigorous pathway where you can feel confident and competent in dealing with some of those social situational things, and not trying to replace clinical care at all. But one of the things that we have done, really focused pretty carefully on the areas, is trying to, and Sammy is a great example on the Sunshine Coast, Sam Parker from Grab Like by the Balls, where he has a number of workshops down the East Coast, and a wonderful human being. And what we found is when we are complementary, so when Sam's about having the barbecue and having a chat, doesn't have to be serious, and then Marcus Mission doing some of the educational stuff and having the forums for that and so forth, it really worked well. And also getting PHNs and Open Minds in Queensland and some of the other agencies, referring to us. One of the things I have done on the Sunny Coast specifically is dropped off a laminated sort of idea of what we're about 500 barbers, tattooists, psychology practices, just to say, this is what we do. We're here to support. We're not here to replace. And that's been really good too, just continually building those links within the communities as well. And we have also done some Facebook advertising, some social media, which has been useful. But really, it does take a while for us to build up, I guess, the momentum where people want to come along and be able to either observe or contribute to some of the workshops. And what was really wonderful after COVID, because we ran about maybe 34 workshops over that 4 months. So we had masses of men that we were connecting with, which was really, really good via Zoom. But when we finished, I said to Glenn Warwick, who's our program manager, hey, Glenn, I'm going to run a barbecue at the start at the surf club, you know, and we're just going to connect with those guys. It was so popular. We've been running it for almost a year now. So, you know, and what is great about that is not just the informal mateship and catch up, but I had a couple of referrals this week, and I said, look, we've got a barbecue at 8. I'll serve you some bacon and eggs. You can meet the fellas, and if you're comfortable, stay. If you're not, that's cool too. But just trying to break that little psychological barrier to getting there, you know. And also the other thing is, when you're at the back of the surf club and you've got a lovely space there, and you can hear the waves, and you can walk on the beach when you're doing your paired breakout sessions. Wow, that's really great. And so the Thompson Institute and many others have offered us these amazing venues, but they're really corporate venues. And so what we want the guys to do is come along with their thongs and shorts and just feel instantly relaxed. So the environment plays a part too.
Gotcha. So we've got Dads in Distress. They've got a location. It's like big signpost. Dads in Distress. Show up here because this is where distressed dads get help. We've got Mates in Construction actually reach out and go into places where there's loads of blokes wearing hard hats, because we know construction sites and those kind of places are filled with blokes. We've got you guys doing this kind of like building a community within the community, and sort of like it is male friendly, but it's almost like it's a bit of a case by case approach until you find the sort of the groove with whatever local community you're building.
Yeah, and that's a bit different. What was really interesting is there were some really traditional areas where we didn't get a lot of buy-in to Zoom. So Bundy was a good example of that. Darling Downs was another. So have to work really well. And I guess one of the expressions that Glenn Warwick came up with is we need town criers. So, you know, my sister, Bonnie, and Marcus's mum is just totally into the community. She's amazing. So she will network. She'll do presentations for Rotary Club, go to men's sheds, we'll have functions. She set up a resilience building forum in the Bundaberg community. That's what we need. We need those people as well as the people that organise it and facilitate it and fund it. We need people out there ringing the bell.
Gotcha. Town criers, we're calling them.
Yeah, exactly. And,
gotcha.
And also giving yourself a bit of space to build momentum before you start. Because, you know, when we're in Bundaberg, I was just facilitating 3 workshops a day from, 8 in the morning till 8 at night. And you know, there was maybe 2 or 3 in some of those, and that's fine. But once we started on the sunny coast, linking with Sam and linking with PHNs and talking to open minds, we actually started to get men that would come along, which was brilliant. So we really have to create a little bit of that interest. And Gladstone was one of those who said, hey, we've got 12 men ready to go as mentors. Can you do a program up here? Absolutely, no problem, So it's trying to get that initial surge, if you like.
Yeah, and those guys in Gladstone, they've been doing things like the Man Walk and stuff like that as well. Yep. So they've been doing that initial community building piece. For those who don't know the Man Walk, that's another peer support program based around going for a walk, talk, support. So it's really good to see these overlaps between these different men's organizations where they can complement each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. So I'll come back to you, Peter. I missed a couple of the things that you said, I think, with the background noise. So forgive me if it sounds in my question like I wasn't listening. I really was. But I think I missed a couple of bits at the end about where you were sort of engaging into. Now, from memory, I remember that you guys were doing these amazing, you called it's the garden rooms, and you'd have 500 people turning up to discussions around different. They were like TV shows. The quality of them was extraordinary. The quality of the speakers you had, and you were filling out these auditoriums with 500 people as a way of building relationship and support for your program. How do you, listen to what I've been saying about the others in terms of how they're connecting? How specifically do you think, what's the interface for you? What's the secret sauce that you're able to replicate in terms of?
Well, I think you're being kind. I don't think I think the biggest one we had was 400, but we didn't quite make the 5. But hey, So garden rooms are topical. So we'll run a garden room on a particular event or a particular social. You know, we did one last year, particularly designed for the hospitality industry. You know, where we got people who were closing their shops, and you know that whole hospitality, hospo industry stuff. So that then triggers down. We've redesigned the model. We do a garden room, then we do tasters, where people can come along and just see whether that's for them. You know, like most of us, we'd all get guys who come in, taste, go, and then it's not for me and drift out again. That's okay. You're going to have some of that. And the town criers are very important. We know where we've got. The other thing that we know is good facilitators keep men engaged in the programs, and that's often the catch cry. While we're not a clinical service, we have a very clear clinical escalation process. One of the reasons why I'm here as a CEO that everybody gets clinical support, both, and we pay a lot of attention to the well-being of the facilitators who run the groups and often see the men coming in and going out. We're connected in the country because I've run some fairly remote programs over the last 20 years where some form of blended delivery and social connection is really important. Most people in the city can get something, but we find that where there's a theme to the group, be it sport, we've got a big presence in the rugby community in Sydney and out the west. In the schools, we run a program we've designed for school leavers. So these are guys, men who have left school and then want to connect, and so they join a group, and it's peer-led, so it's age appropriate, and so on. So it's a mixed model depending on the nature of the bodies coming into it. But like most of them, we have a coming to a point where guys can join our group for as long as they want, but after they've been through the cycle. Then they say, well, what do we do next? Well, quite frankly, you probably could go out and be a big boy and pass on, but you can come back as an alumni group. So we're changing the model so that it has a lifespan of say 6, 9, 12 months, depending how frequently, and we're modeling it so that there's a rolling intake, so that people at the end of a point of time will have been through the entire cycle.
Gotcha. That's great. So
it's about skill sets. I don't mention mental health. I don't mention mental health issues. We just talk about skill sets.
Yeah, right.
And John will pick up something, Steve will pick up something else, Bob will pick up something else, and during the course of the entire discussion, they then cover off all the basic skill sets about life skills and competency.
Gotcha. So I'm going to come. Thank you, Peter. I'm going to come back now to Ross and Steve. And one of the sort of questions I prepped you on, which is again another very straightforward question. I'm making the assumption that we all think that peer support's a good thing for blokes, and we'd like more of it out there. So the question is, what's the barrier to getting more of it out there? And it doesn't. In responding to that, yeah, sure. Tell us your plans for expansion and world domination and what's getting in the way of you having 4,000 of your groups out there, but also maybe even thinking about sort of more taking peer support out into the wider sort of making it a cultural norm, if you like, as well. Steve, I'll come to you first. What's stopping us getting more peer support for blokes out
there? Well, I think again, I'll go back to probably what I said at the first time I spoke is, I don't think it's people don't want to help one another and support one another, and blokes don't want to support each other. I think there's a fear that they're going to make matters worse if it's addressed and spoken to. If we're continually trying to break down a taboo that has been set up in especially males, that you suck it up, you don't tell anybody your business, you keep it to yourself, it'll bury it down and it'll all work out as long as you drink enough Jack Daniels or red wine, it'll all figure itself out in the end. And we're sort of starting to break down that taboo. So is there a need for more? The more people the merrier, as far as we're concerned. We are not we're not particular who gets help, how they get help, where they get help from, as long as they get help. And what we found out was that if you support a bloke to get that help, and he's someone who's on site or your mate, it's easier for that person to never mind get the help, walking to that front door of the first time you've got to make an appointment with a counsellor, walking in through that door is probably the hardest part, never mind how you get to that point. So if we can support them to get to that door, get through that door, and what we do in Mates is we have case managers who know that when that person is going to have their appointment, that they will follow up and say, okay, you had your appointment yesterday or a day or so ago. How did that go? How did you feel about that? Construction workers generally don't understand. They think that they're going to go in and tell the counsellor what happened, what's going on. And then the counsellor said, so I've got all the answers for you. So here you go. There's a sheet of paper with 6 things to do. And they don't go back. What we want to do is maintain that support to get them to go back, to feel that someone's checking in, for want of a better terminology. So I think, going back to, I think I touched on your question. I think that the more we have, the better, but it's about breaking down that stigma and that taboo of, keep it all inside and don't let anybody know that you're vulnerable. And if we model that appropriate behavior, which I think we do, we just model a behavior that it's okay to be not okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's life. Life's going to be tough sometimes, but it's not always going to be like that. So once you change that headspace and that thinking away from that, so it's a tough ask. Don't get me wrong. Concreters and block layers and chippies and plumbers and stuff don't want to hear that sort of stuff. They know about it, but it's kind of like, don't let it come near me because I might catch it. So we're changing that bit by bit. It's
and how important is it for those that list of tradies you listed out, which I can't remember now, but I'm going to say the plumbers and the chippies and the bricklayers. I'm going to pick my own list. How important is it for those construction workers and tradies to hear that message from someone who's like them? Does that's the peer bit, right? Is it important? Will they listen to it if it's from a psychologist or from a mental health professional? Are they more open to that if it's someone like them?
It absolutely is important that they hear it from someone that they connect with. And I'm not saying that they can't connect with psychologists or social workers, but I think it's important for them to feel that they're on level terms. Once we started in the beginning, maybe we used so much jargon and all these good words and stuff like that merely made sense to us, didn't make sense to them. So it's really about talking to them on a level that they understand and get, and them understanding that just because they're struggling doesn't mean nobody else is struggling, because you can go into your own little shell and go, this is all me, it's all caving in, it's all about, how bad things are for me. And they look at other people and go, so how is everybody else really okay? Why are they special? Why are they not like me? When nothing could be further from the truth. They are exactly like you. They just hide it as well as you do, sometimes males are seen as being very uncomplicated creatures. I think sometimes it's 50-50 that we're actually quite complicated in the way we do things and the way we interact with each other. Someone once said to me that there was this unwritten script between males that I ask you, how are you? How you doing? You answer me, I'm okay. Everybody ticks off the box to say we've all done our bit and we all move on. The last thing we want to do is say to someone, how you are? And they go, well, actually, thanks for asking. This is it's most blokes' worst nightmare, and that needs to change. We're just a little bit more empathetic and understanding that it may not be us now, but it could be us in a year's time or 2 years' time. So we just need to understand what it's like whenever someone's struggling and not worry about asking them, that it's not going to make matters worse. It's only going to make matters better.
Gotcha, Steve. Thank you. And are you what's your trade by background? Are you a tradesman in the mental health space?
Me?
Yeah.
I started in construction when I left school at 16 because I didn't listen too good at school, but I actually have a Bachelor of Social Work from the JCU in Queensland. But I've worked in and out of construction since I left school at 16.
Gotcha. Yeah. I've got some work that needs doing. I wonder if I could get a hand. That was all.
I got a couple of good contacts I can put you in touch with.
Okay, thank you, Ross. So global domination for dads in distress. I mean, obviously, you know, I don't know, 15, 20 groups or something like that. The helpline's running, but we know there's many more dads out there going through the distress of a family separation and the courts that are not being reached. How do we reach more of those dads?
Yeah, it's a dilemma. It's a very interesting question, actually, Glenn, and it's a dilemma that we've been faced with almost for the whole existence of DIDS and Parents Beyond Breakup, which is close to 20 years. For us, you know, we used to think that the silver bullet to fixing this problem, that, you know, what we see as situational distress, which is a major contributor towards suicide, we always used to believe it was just purely funding. But I think over time we've kind of discovered that it's not. I suppose you're looking for an outcome without addressing the need. So for us, understanding the need and understanding, you know, embracing that need, which is men needing support, is actually something that is closer to our heart than actually just getting funding. I mean, funding's absolutely, you know, instrumental in us, you know, getting more support groups out there, getting more awareness, making sure that the public knows who we are. Because half the time, most of the dads that come to our groups just said, I had no idea you guys existed. I was referred to by somebody else or through a helpline. You know, you're not easy to find, or, you know, and yet we've been around for 20 years. So whilst funding could help, especially get more of the word out, I think the core issue for us is just acceptance. A little bit to what's the, you know, what was mentioned earlier on, that basically I think we need to get rid of that, I suppose, that stigma around, you know, support for men being tricky, as in, okay, men don't talk. Well, we actually don't find that men don't talk. You know, we don't agree with the men don't talk part, because men who come to our groups, we can't shut them up. They're finally finding a group of like-minded individuals who fully understand where they're coming from, understand the situations that they're dealing with, the dilemma, and alternatively, we get rid of that sense of isolation and hopelessness, which is, you know, the key areas that helps us reduce the suicidality amongst our cohort. But I think, you know, if I can take it, you know, to the heads above, that, you know, the key leaders of this organisation, or this nation actually, who are focusing on tackling male suicide. If you look at the stats, as we all know, you know, high amount of men. We're actually quite finding that, you know, the dads who are going through situational distress through family separation, and that's 50% of marriages, you know, they're bound to be affected. So it's just getting down to the need of understanding that men need support as much as women do, you know, and treating it in a equitable way so that the funding is balanced. You know, we can all focus on, as I said, reducing the suicide stats, but I haven't seen the execution go as good as it could be, and I haven't seen enough to actually start, you know, providing more support for organisations like the ones like ours and all the other organisations that are our peers. So for us, we really want to start getting more awareness out there. We want to understand that there is a massive need for men's support, and that stigma that men are hard to support. You know, we need to squash that, because ultimately we're telling you the other side. Men need support, and men are more than ever reaching out for support. It's just there's not enough support out there.
Yeah, great. That's really good insights, Ross. So pulling out to the rest of the panel again, I've got a question for you all. Is there a design fault? If we're just looking at it from an expansionist perspective, just for a little bit longer, bear with me. I like conversations around world domination. Is there a design fault in peer support? Is it strength, its weakness? Is it the fact that we actually have to use peers to do this work? That, you know, and peers are complex. Peers aren't professionals. We're largely training volunteers, and the kind of support they give is more that kind of human interaction, not necessarily that formal therapy. Would it be just easier if we just trained a lot of therapists to do one-to-one work? Yeah, John, straight in there.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn, a couple of things from my perspective. The first one is when Marcus died, one of the things that we noticed, he said to us once, you know, hey, you know, I can't relate in any way to a 65-year-old white female as my psychologist, you know. his 23-year-old boy, you know, and oh man, you know, but I think that there's one element there, but I think the other thing is one of the things we do every month with all of our mentors is we do coaching and group supervision for them. So we make sure that their skills are absolutely sharp. We don't have a single mentor working that can't demonstrate that they can have a conversation without fixing, rescuing, or solving. So coming back to something that Ross said, you know, it is an empowerment model. You know, we're not here to take that away. We're saying, here's some skills, here's a mentor, you know, you got to do the heavy lifting. But at the same time, I do think that, you know, we have a requirement to make sure that even those casual conversations, they get safety planning. They do get, you know, the basic idea of asking questions and reflecting and helping that person to clarify the obstacles and their goals and so forth. And I don't, you know, I think the range of clinicians is fantastic, but we don't absolutely need that for every person. And in fact, I reckon there's a bit of a trade-off between comfort and relatability. And a lot of our guys at tradies, Steve, you know, where they come along and say, so are you a counsellor by background? No, actually, I'm a tiler. I just came into the program to help other blokes, you know. So, you know, just this idea that they really relate to them. They've all had lived experience. They've all had either a relationship breakup, custody issues, some sort of addiction or health issues. And that's the thing that gives them some credibility. So, you know, one example I can give you is that we've got a guy on the Sunshine Coast, ex-federal policeman, ex-infantryman. He's had PTSD, has PTSD, physical injuries, gone through addictions. The guy he's mentoring talks to me and said, I've never known someone who just gets it, because he understands the chronic injury, he understands the addiction. There's no judgment. He's just seeing me every week, you know?
Yeah.
And that's rewarding.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John.
And Glenn, if I can just...
I'm going to go to Peter, who's been sitting on the side a little while, and I'll come back to you, Ross. Peter, your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Ken. Underpinning a lot of the men's reluctance is the evidence tells us very clearly that men interact socially differently to women. Women connect emotionally much more easily, and there's a whole, you know, very, very clear draft of evidence in that. Separating the sexes has quite a lot of value, both in terms of education and self-help. And that's proven despite all the other conversations to go around. The lived experience gives credibility, and most people who don't have a chronic mental health illness, who have a reactionary condition, marriage breakup or whatever, need support and mild clinical support while they work their way through a problem-solving process. Okay, the basic tenets of CBT. Will get most people, 90% of the people feel okay within 2 to 3 months. They learn a new set of skills, they adjust how they behave, they habituate to the environment, and off they sail. Okay, so there's an enormous need across the Australian community for a subclinical level, and there's a gap in terms of the step care models across the community where the government medicalise everything. You have to go to your GP for a referral. You need to go to a registered clinician and so on. And I'm a registered clinician, so I know I've got a bit of self-protection going on there. But I know from my own experience, I don't need to see you after 3 to 6 months because you're doing it, you're working on it, it's progression, you'll get better at it. Yeah. So I'm getting traction with organisations who have men's cohorts who are maybe coming out of addiction. And there's nothing they do is they come out of an addiction program of 3 to 6 months, then they drop on their own asses back out in the community. So there's no post-event or post-therapy initiative that's coming out of men's behaviour change programs, that's coming out of addiction programs, that's coming out of violence programs. It's a whole range of things like that. So the peer support then can support them while they consolidate new ways of thinking, behaving and reacting. So, you know, that's probably, in terms of where we can all go as a cohort of organisations, is an opportunity there, you know, and that's certainly where the clinicians often go, and working within the funding system with the government, what is found a step care model. People step up into care and they step down out of care. There's some gaps at the bottom end.
Right, and where do you see the staying with you for a minute, Peter? Like, there's a lot of groups emerging where there's a strong focus on social connection, but they don't necessarily have that formal level where like they're training mentors or they've got a clinical framework. I mean, often they'll have a list that they refer people to. They'll say, we're not a mental health group, we're not a clinical group. Here are some organizations you could go to. But clearly they're adding value. Where do you see the sort of social connection?
Men are lonely. The evidence is if you're over 55 and single, you're a lonely person. You lack social connection. You know, the women, I have a friend of mine who said she went through a very bitter divorce when there was a lot of family violence. And it was, quote, the sisterhood who got her through it all, who kept her well, safe, supported, housed, bedded, financially supported. Men do not do that with each other. At the end of a funeral, you know, Ross will say to me, thanks, mate, I hope you're feeling better. Let me know if there's anything you need. And 3 to 6 months later, after the funeral, the loss of your partner, you're on your own and you're struggling. So we know pensioners, male pensioners, socially isolate. So there's an opportunity for the older health, for older men in Australia. And that's why the men's shed works so well. It gives them purpose. Men struggle to reinvent themselves for a whole variety of reasons. So peer-led and groups like ours and the ones here you've got today provide some purpose there. And the other thing it does is it justifies it doesn't justify. It reduces the guilt and shame around not coping.
Right.
Particularly in the white community, you know, if you're going to be a dad, I'm going to be the best dad possible. And now that what's in your head about what a good dad looks like may not be the best model, but it's the one you've got. So we acquire our coping skills at a young age. We acquire our social values at a young age. And peer-led support means you can shift that thinking in a safe way. So, you know, and it does acknowledge guilt about failing, guilt about not achieving, guilt and shame about coming out, having a failed relationship breakups, having to change jobs, doesn't matter what it is, but peer support really acknowledges and deals with guilt quite positively.
Great. Look, I'm going to open it up a little bit now, and then before coming back to, we'll see how the conversation goes when we open it up, and I will then come back to you all for final thoughts. There's been a load of great comments going on. People talking about the different groups that they're involved in, having some of their own reflections on the questions asked. If you want to pop a hand up, use the old-fashioned method of this, or the technological method of finding the reactions button and pressing the raise hand feature like that. Give us a wave now, and it'd be good to hear from a couple of people what you're hearing in this conversation. If you've got questions, you've got observations, have I got any takers from the floor after this?
Spot here.
Spot, go ahead, my friend.
I've been listening. I must be a strange old bird. I'm well over 70. Lost a wife 2 years ago. I have got time to scratch myself. In fact, trying to fit in everything in, like at the Veterans Centre in God's Country in Coffs Harbour. I'm at the Veterans Centre nearly 4 to 5 days a week, and probably our clientele is just walks in off the street, and we handle their different situations there and then. And they're all basically, ours is just veterans. There is a difference between veterans in suicide and general public male in suicide. There is a hell of a difference, is that to get with them, you have to understand what they went through. So basically it comes down essentially to be a peer support person or an ex-veteran yourself, which I am. So we can communicate with them on their situations. Just recently I've had 2 and we've got through really well. They're situated fine. They were only very young. They were in their mid-30s. But it was a family situation, not understanding what they went through basically in Afghanistan after 3 tours of duty. So that's what we deal with there. But as I say, I've been listening nearly most of the day, all that, but I do find that the basic professionals that are out there unless they've had something to do with the services previously, they do not understand what the actual veteran is. And that's when we may get a referral back from a person if we can go and see them and talk to them, and then we do that. So that's what I'd like to see more, is that in the airways now, there's more on, suicides amongst veterans, but there's really not a great out there in understanding. And when you say you'd like to be a peer support, you go through so many hoops to get there. It's not funny. In the last 2 years anyway, I've done the Community Services Cert 4 and Mental Health Cert 4 and so many different other avenues to maintain a credibility within the Veteran Centre. So it is a hard yakka for people that want to get into this business of being a peer support person, but there's so many hoops, and this is what shies off a lot of people in being a volunteer to get there.
Thanks, Spot.
We're having a hard time in Coffs.
Yeah, got it. And look, sorry to hear about your wife.
No, I'm happy.
Gotcha. I've got it. I won't dig any further into that story. Thank you for being here today. And I think the point you make, though, about the value of veterans being able to talk to another vet who's been through what they've been through and understands what they've been through is very powerful and would apply to many different groups of men when it comes to peer support. Ross, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it's look, thank you very much, Spot, for highlighting that. And it's something that I wanted to bring up as well, because the clear standout, and I think all the speakers on the panel today have highlighted it. The lived experience is one thing, and empowering the people that we support is massive. But I think the key word that the clinical side of support for men that we are not of is empathy. Like Spot mentioned, veterans supporting other vets, they'll have empathy because they know what it's like. You can get true empathy from that. But if a veteran went to a clinical psychologist or as I said, someone in the traditional support model for men, it's very hard to find that empathy. It's not something that can be taught. Usually lived experience is what plays the most beneficial factor here. So I think that's the big thing that I'm noticing. Empathy is just something that you get very unique with peer support. And my view, just going back to your original question, if you want to dominate the world up, and really make a massive impact, I think just providing a holistic approach to supporting men, especially around suicide. I mean, you could have someone with a heart condition, so they'll go see their GP will talk to their cardiologist will talk to radio, the whole number of services are supporting that person from a physiological perspective. But from when we're going through situational or mental or, areas where men need support, and it's well documented these days, the type of support that we're needing, we're not having a holistic approach around it. And if we use the holistic approach, then peer support would be way up there, all of a sudden realizing there's a gap, and we're one of those gaps.
Thanks, Ross. I'm going to come to your colleague who's in the audience, Phil Lamport from Dads in Distress, who's also got his hand up.
Thank you, Glenn. Great discussion, and watching the chat has been fantastic as well. All day it's just been quality. I just wanted to chime in with a couple of thoughts. Look, I think trust, which has come up in previous sessions as well, is really a big one, and it kind of speaks to a lot of the points we're talking about here. Is you can't get guys to turn up to the groups if they don't trust what they're going to get when they get there. And there's a lot of aspects to that, mate. Maybe they don't understand what it is exactly that they're expecting when they get there, or what's going to be asked of them. We had a previous comment there from Lisa about shame, and this is also true. This creates a trust barrier because blame and shame has historically been, unfortunately, part of a lot of the services maybe that they've come into contact with, or some of their experiences. And that's not to cast blame on any of the professional services that are out there, but you know, that's just part of what's happened, is they have experienced blame and shame when they've come along and reached out for help. So I think trust, as far as going back to your earlier question, Glenn, of, you know, how do we get world domination? How do we bring peer support to the world? And how do we, you know, reach out and actually engage? For me, and from all of, I mean, I've been involved in DIDS since 2010, so 11 years now. And my experience, you know, working with them every day is that is a huge part. Seeing the people that turn up for the first time, you know, trust is, some of them have only just learned about us. Many you've known for a long time, and it's taken them a long time to build up to actually coming into the room, even with the reputation that we have, because of trust issues. And I'll just say that it kind of goes a little bit deeper than, you know, whether or not that person is able to give them empathy, or be even, you know, an effective treatment. It's their perception of whether they're getting empathy and effective treatment. And you might be a, you know, a GP or a psychologist with a great bedside manner, but the perception is, they're not taking me seriously, or they don't know what it's like. Whereas when you're talking to a peer, that's kind of a given. That's already there. You don't even need to actually be, and look at me, you know, especially empathetic. I don't think I am at all. And yet, you know, that's kind of it's almost becomes redundant when you are talking to a peer, because they know that you know what they're going through. You know, they know that you know what it feels like. So, look, obviously, massive advocate of peer support. I think it's, you know, I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I see the value every single day, and every interaction I have with these guys, have done for many years. So yeah, anyway, that's my
okay, thanks for that contribution, Phil, and thanks for the work that you do. Steve Jackson, Mason Construction.
Yeah, just listening to what Phil was saying there, I agree that there's got to be a balance between peer support, putting an arm around someone who's a colleague, who's a workmate, who's a family friend, whatever it may be. I think there's a balance between that and the actual professional services that are there. Now, if someone were to give me the blue sky approach to how we could do all this, if I had the power and the to, as you say, change the world, you know, I'm not saying we completely revamp how we educate people coming through university who are going to be social workers, who are going to be psychologists, who are going to be counselors. I don't think we need to change it, but I think there's got to be some. It's 2021. There's a way of engaging with people who come in to do some professional counseling or wherever that may be. And the reason why I bring that up is we discovered quite early on that a lot of construction workers were not actually going to see a counsellor or their employee assistance program for fear that the people couldn't be trusted, that they would in some way report back to their employer, so that the guy then was notified upon by his employer to say that he was accessing counselling services for whatever reason. Now, we all know that that's not the case, because if one employee assistance program divulged all of their information to the employers out there, they wouldn't be in existence for too long, because once that trust is broken once, nobody would ever go back to them again. So there's a whole mindset around that, you know, trusting. If you have that peer support that says something like, and I hear it all the time, on our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week helpline, there are people who ring up for their friends or family members and say, you know, he wants to get some help, or she wants to get some help. I actually said to them that I went and got help a few years ago, and that seemed to be okay. That sort of breaks the ice of going, well, if I was there 2 years ago and you need to go there too, that's okay. So I think it's really important that we continue to push the peer support, but in balance with the professionals that are out there. But it's really about understanding. People need to understand that the help, the professional help out there will help, but they just got to give it time. You know, going back to what Peter was saying, 3 months, 6 months, whatever that may be. People don't have the patience for that. They want to get it fixed, you know, 2 sessions, bingo, and we're all done. And if you help them understand that and explain that, I think that means a big difference too. And that's where peer support comes in.
I just wanted to clarify, sorry, Steve, that I certainly wasn't trying to say that peer support is better than professional services, if I gave that impression.
Not at all.
I'm very clear about that. It's value add only, yes.
Not at all. It goes hand in hand, Phil. Absolutely.
Yeah. Come to Peter Seligman and then Tony Webb. Peter.
Just a quick one. Again, Steve, you're right. We've got an instant quick fix. When I've gone back and talked to guys who've only come to a session or two in the bank, said, oh, well, I didn't think it was for me. And it's about how we all set the process up. It's, people want a quick fix. Now, we know from evidence of other things, if you go to a group or a doctor or a GP or a hairdresser or a mechanic or whatever, you make up a mind whether that's going to work for you, whether that's true or not. So it's about how we set people know. You don't get a quick fix if you want to be fit. You don't get a quick fix if you want to get well. You don't get a quick fix if you want to become resilient and a more competent adult. I've had 4 bouts of cancer. It's taught me a whole shitload of things about myself and the world that works that I never knew. I felt I needed to know, wanted to learn, and wasn't prepared to learn, but I did. So, it is about setting it up and saying, you're not bulletproof. You're going to change. You're going to break something. You need to reinvent yourself, and this is a life journey. So it is, in terms of going back to your comment about how do we get people engaged, it's about, we don't all have the right answers, and you step up and in and out and up and down through care. I ran a program for a number of years where young adults would come in and we might see them intensely therapeutically for 3, 4, 6 visits, whatever. They disappear. And if they needed a tune up, they'd come back in again. No stigma, no tap. They just come and go. And then, it's like when your blood pressure flares up, you go back to your GP and you adjust your medication. So, the learnings that are out there in the community, we just need to have a paradigm shift for men's well-being and using peer support to bridge the gaps.
Great, thanks, Peter. Tony Webb, who's been dropping in some comments, been here all day, I've noticed, and been dropping in some comments about work at the Health and Men's Shed. Tony, rather.
Thank you. Peter just touched on and several times mentioned this issue of stigma, shame, guilt, and there's been a bit in the chat about it as well, raising questions. The reason why we work with this kind of peer group work as part of our community response to the problem of suicide and suicide prevention is in part because for many of the guys who are facing that as an issue, there's a huge element of shame associated with those feelings and those thoughts. And for them to approach a professional, they are automatically then entering into a relationship where there is a status differential between the professional and them, the client and the counsellor. And there's a whole shame dynamic that needs to be unpicked before that relationship can come to one of real trust and empathy, and the sense that the guy gets that he really is being understood and not just being helped, but actually is being really understood in his terms rather than in the terms of the professional. What we're able to do in our group work is, first of all, to train our guys to pick up on any signs that there is any suicide ideation going on in whatever stories people tell, and to ask the open question, what's going on for you, mate? What's going on here? To really draw it out, not let it sit underneath the surface. Second is to listen, really listen to the way in which he describes what is going on for his experience, and then not to give advice, but within our group to in a sense, speak from our own experience, what it brings up for us listening to somebody sharing that kind of stuff. Sometimes telling our own stories. I have a story where once in my life I went bush for 6 days with no intention of coming back. I ended up sitting down on a bull ant's nest and realized that wasn't the right way to go. Bull ants did me a big favor, gave me a good bite in the arse, and I got going again. But so we can laugh about that. But in a sense, many of us have these stories about having walked that edge, sometimes looked over it, sometimes stepped over it and come back. And by being able to share those stories in that context, it normalizes the experience the guy is going through. He's not alone. Those things that he's thinking, feeling, behaving are not just for him alone. But it also does something else. Because he's able to see his story reflected through the stories and the eyes of the other people, it gives him a certain amount of distance from the intense feelings that he's often carrying around it. And the strange thing is that when you can get somebody to that 1 foot in, 1 foot out, close enough in to be able to feel, and just far enough out to be able to observe themselves feeling it, something strange happens. And often what we're holding as the thing that's blocking us from thinking and reframing it just discharges on its own. How it works, we don't fully understand, but we do know that when any time it works within a group, at the end of it, when we're doing the debriefing and what are we taking away from tonight, the guys will say, I'm feeling so much lighter. Yeah, I think I can think about that again in a different kind of way. So that is the process that we'd work as peer group. Now, one other thing I'd like to add to that is that I don't in any way dismiss the role of the professional. The first aid approach we use is based on Beyond Blues thing in terms of the 3 things: question, draw it out; persuade, actively point out to somebody that going down that path of carrying it out would cause a hell of a lot of pain to me, to everybody else in the group, to his family, and doesn't really resolve anything. And then be prepared to refer, so that behind our group work, we do have a network of psychologists in the community that we can refer somebody to make sure that they get the necessary backup and support where it's needed. But
Thanks,
ours
Tony.
is, in a sense, the first line. If we can't put something like that into the community, I don't think we're going to resolve it by having more money into the professional services. That's my view.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tony, and thanks for providing that deeper insight into some of the mechanics of how peer support works, particularly in a group context, and that subtle but powerful distinction between giving advice, this is what you should do, and sharing a story, this is what happened to me and this is what I did. And a really powerful group worker or peer support worker can select from which stories to tell, but it's something magical emerges anyway, simply by being in a circle and being around other men sharing their story. And that thing about the men discharging something that they weren't able to let go of previously, and by the end of the group saying they feel lighter. What's astounded me in my experience of peer group work is that can happen even when the man doesn't talk. You can sit there for 2 hours and go, I came in at a 1 and now I'm a 10, or I came in stressed out max 9 and now I'm whatever. It's amazing the deep power of peer work beyond all the other things we've named. And with that in mind, I'm going to wrap us up by 4:15 formally, and I'm going to come back one more time to each of our 4 panelists. Before I do, I just want to acknowledge some of the groups that are represented here, and they've been dropping names in the chat box. Just demonstrate how many different peer support groups there are out there. Circle of Men, which works with older men, particularly providing mentoring in daycare services. It's East Gippsland's Men's Health. Tomnet, that's the Older Men's Network in Toowoomba. Men's Kitchen, Penrith Walk and Talk, Eltham Men's Sheds, which Tony's been referring to, the Australian Man Cave, just a handful of, there's many more. We could keep listing and listing and listing. There's this great movement of male peer support groups across Australia. And that's why, one of the reasons why we chose to have this session, not just to give you an opportunity to spend time with these 4 speakers, but also to actually celebrate and acknowledge the important work that all those different peer groups are doing, and to say that this is a type of work which has real value and needs more support. So very simple, but maybe a challenging question. And in a couple of words or bullet points or a sentence, you decide. The question will be, why does peer support work? What is the magic that makes peer support work? So I'm going to come back to each of you as you formulate your answer. And I'm going to go to John first. John.
Thanks, Glenn. That's great. I noticed in the comments from Jeff Lawrence, who's a very wise man, is that notion of authentic connection. I mean, the guys that do the best with us, sure, they've got lived experience, but they are passionate about helping others, and they're passionate about listening and reflecting and helping their mates, if you like, do the heavy lifting, not coming from the parent-child mode. And I think that's absolutely critical. Combine that with skills, and then combine that with updating their skills regularly and keeping them confident. And I do think it's a significant cog in that holistic wheel that was described before.
Awesome. It's a relationship of equality. It's mates helping mates.
Yeah.
Great. Peter at the Banksia Project.
A simple version: empathy fuels connection, connection reduces loneliness, and loneliness reduces the risk of suicide. If you reduce loneliness, you always reduce the risk of suicide, and people then can move into a problem-solving mode if they've got some shit going on. It's a causal connection.
Got it. Beautiful. Nice model. I'll come to you, Ross, and then Steve to finish off. Ross, why does it work?
Similar to the other guys, I think empathy just provides connection, especially in a non-judgmental form. It really normalizes the situation, and ultimately, it reduces that sense of isolation and hopelessness. I think it's a direct impact. So, yeah, peer support, empathy, and empowerment from all that. They're the key things that I believe peer support works.
Great. Thanks, Ross. And finally, Steve Jackson.
So I think it works, and it's extremely beneficial when you have someone who you can relate, who is relatable, who is like-minded, who is not going to judge, who is not going to, here's how I did it whenever I was going through all of this stuff. So it's really important that there's that relationship, and that's why peer support works as useful.
Fantastic. I'm going to chuck in my own one. Peer support works not just in suicide prevention, in many different contexts. It works for men as well as it works for women. It can work in mixed gender settings. When it comes to male suicide prevention and promoting men's mental health, one of the great things about peer support for me is it builds on one of the great strengths, not just of masculinity, but of Aussie masculinity, which is the principle of mateship. And that's what peer support ultimately is all about: mates helping mates, blokes helping blokes, doing something useful and helpful for your mate. Something that I personally experienced traveling around Australia in a motorhome for a couple of years, that it was impossible to break down on the side of the road and be left there for more than a few minutes, because there was always some bloke to come along and help you out, because they wanted to be helpful and they knew what to do. And for me, if we can just actually give, men are ready to help. Men really want to be part of the suicide problem. They want to be part of the solution. And if we can give more men the skills and the confidence to do suicide prevention, to do peer support, then I think we'll be a lot closer to solving the problem that 9 people a day in Australia still die by suicide, and 7 of them are men and 2 of them are women. That's the end of the session and the end of today. Thanks for everyone who's been with us all day. Thanks for all the great speakers we've had, and the facilitators and the production team. And thank you in particular for this session to 4 great speakers. Give them a hand with your virtual claps, or however you want to do it, to Ross Ariola from Parents Beyond Breakup, Jon Morgan from Marcus Mission, Steve Jackson from Mates in Construction, and Peter Seligman from the Banksia Project. I have been Glenn Paul of the Australian Men's Health Forum. This is Men's Health Connected. We will be back tomorrow. For now, it's goodbye, and it's the end of day 1. Thank you.